Lana, welcome back to the Visionary Life podcast. It's funny, as I was prepping for this interview, I was like, how long ago was our last recording together? And I'm like scrolling back through the archives, and I noticed that you were episode 69, one of our earlier seasons. And my gosh, it's been 2 to 3 years since then. And I know we've kept in touch via the power of Instagram, but I know so much has changed in your world, in my world, and everybody's world. So I'm really excited to be catching up with you today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me back. Yeah, the world is definitely a different place than it was since the last time we spoke, and
Totally. And I
always.
was even just thinking about like where we recorded, which was in my co-working space at the time. And that just seems like a forever lifetime ago. So it's almost nostalgic to think back to that initial time that we met and just like sitting down. We had never met each other before, just like talking about business and life. And I am really grateful actually to social media, I guess, Instagram, for having that effect of being able to connect with anybody and to stay in touch, even when we don't necessarily pass each other on the street every day. So it is kind of cool that we've been able to continue like seeing what each other are up to.
Yeah, yeah, and look at you now. You've upgraded, and you have a home, and you have your own office, and you're always out there paddleboarding. It is awesome to stay in touch.
And you took off to BC during the pandemic, right? And now you're back in Ontario. What made you decide to leave and go explore something new for the last 6 months?
Honestly, I think you know how like everyone has done something a little wild and crazy during the
Totally.
pandemic? Like some people are having babies, some people are getting houses, some people are like moving across the world. One of my friends moved all the way across the world to Bali. Like a few of my friends have become pregnant. So,
Yep.
I felt like I got to spice things up a little bit too. And I feel like the move to BC was my, you know, mid-pandemic crisis.
Mm-hmm,
Like a
mm-hmm.
midlife crisis, but a mid-pandemic crisis. And I just needed a change. And I got to a point financially where I could finally afford having my own apartment, which I
Mm-hmm.
had been manifesting and dreaming of for so long. And it was just
So
like what I
cool.
wanted. And I'm like browsing apartments in Toronto, and they're insanely unaffordable. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how people live in Toronto. And then it just hit me, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to live in British Columbia. I'm going to do it. So I packed up my car with all of my stuff, and my intention was to move there for the indefinite future.
Mm. And I know that it only ended up being like a half a year, which we may actually get into the why you moved
Yeah.
back, but we'll just cue that up for the listener to stay tuned in the
Yeah.
episode.
Stay tuned. It's a juicy little psychedelics involved story.
Oh, so cool. So let's talk about that. So I guess to cue this up, I'd like to share that you also host a podcast called Modern Psychedelics. I believe you wrapped up your first season back in the summer, right?
Yes. Yes. We've
So
taken a prolonged break. We didn't intend to, but it just
yeah.
turned out that way, and it's all perfect.
Okay, I love this. So before we dive into the podcast and the move back, can you just introduce why are you so passionate about psychedelics? When were you first introduced to them? How did this come into your world? Take us back to that and give us the origin story.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I just want to preface this by saying I love that we're at this time in society right now where we can actually have this conversation and talk about
Yeah.
psychedelics normally, because that was definitely not the case even like when we first met. I
I probably would have
remember.
been like, what are you talking about? You
Well,
know?
did we ever mention psychedelic? I think we did at the very end. You asked me what I was really passionate about. And
Yep.
I was like, I remember in my mind, I was going through what I wanted to say. And I was like, I want to mention psychedelics, but I don't want to be judged by Kelsey, or not that I think you're judgmental, but like, I
Yeah,
just don't want like judgment for anyone. Like, is it okay to talk about these things? And I think
totally.
I did actually mention it. So ever since then, it's a, it's a dinner conversation now. Like,
Yeah.
everyone is talking about it everywhere.
Mhm.
So I'm so grateful that that's where we're at. But how did I get into them? So, I mean, I'm 30 right now, and in my early to late ish 20s, mid to late 20s, like for 3 or 4 years, I was a party girl. Okay. I was going to like all of the raves in Toronto. I was like hanging out with people who were really into house music and like a lot of DJs. And I was just like really in that rave culture, which was such a beautiful experience. And they were like some of the most fun years of my life, just going out and listening to amazing music and dancing all night and connecting with friends. It was such special memories. But if you're staying up all night, you need some stimulation, right? Like you need some help to stay up all night. So that's kind of how I first got into this world. And it was definitely for the purpose of just like having fun, you know, dancing all night, bonding, connecting, and making memories. And then somewhere along the way, I mean, I first started experimenting mostly with MDMA, which is like a guaranteed good time and not technically a psychedelic, but I started to experiment with magic mushrooms. And it reached this point where I started having these like very mystical experiences with them. Um, I went to this festival in Ontario called Harvest Festival. It's kind of like a mini Burning Man vibe. It's a very spiritual community. And yeah, that was probably the first time that I looked up at the night sky on mushrooms and I was just like, whoa, like so taken aback by this cosmic simulation that we're living in.
Yeah.
So that was the point where I kind of was like, okay, this is not just about having fun. And then the following year, I had an experience with LSD where I was actually able to quit smoking cigarettes. Like I just had this reflection at that time and I was like, why am I doing this? And I knew I wanted to stop, but I had had so much trouble stopping. And I made myself that commitment at that time in that moment. I was like, I'm going to quit smoking cigarettes. This isn't good for me. It's not aligned with me. And I did. And
Wow.
that was just like another one of those moments where I was like, okay, there's something more to this. And then now I use psychedelics in a much more healing, self actualization type of way. And that came about because someone that was very dear to me at the time was struggling with a lot of mental health problems.
Mm-hmm.
And they were seeking out alternative modalities. They had been on, like antidepressants their entire life,
Yeah.
and they were just going through a lot. And they shared with me about ayahuasca. And I had known about it before, but I started researching it more and more. And there was this moment in my research hole, like I went deep.
Yeah.
I was like, I wanted to learn, like I watched all the documentaries, listened to all the podcasts, just wanted to learn everything about this. And there was this moment where I became so activated, Kelsey, that I knew that there was going to be a time where I was going to work with this medicine, but I was terrified of it because people puke on it. It's a
Mm.
purgatory medicine, so you actually vomit, and that really scared me. But then there was also this piece of like, I will have to confront myself and face myself in a way that I've never had to before. I don't even know who I am. Who am I? Am I ready to learn who I truly am? So, yeah, I knew that that was coming for me. I was scared. And then a few years later, I was in a place of just like being a totally broken, heartbroken, and probably not too long after we last talked. I was
Yep.
going through a heartbreak. I was doing therapy. I had reached a wall and I was like, it's time. It's time. And I started working with ayahuasca, and I've been sitting with the medicine for 2 years now, over 2 years. And it's just been the blessing of my life.
Mm-hmm. Do
So
you
that probably
feel
brings us to
like
today.
when you like look at your journey with psychedelics and with plant medicine, like has that been really the catalyst for you becoming who you are or like stepping into more of who you already are?
Yeah, it's been a huge part of that, a huge part of that, because what happens is a lot of these, and this is something that I'm working through right now, like these are constant lessons and things that you're working through. And we'll talk about integration later, maybe, but a lot of the self perceptions and like false self-perceptions and false narratives and false judgments that I have attached to Lana
Yeah.
get just stripped away. And you're just left to confront that and to confront like, well, why do I make this mean something about me? What does this mean about me? Why do I do that? What am I allowing that to mean about who I am? And it's really just like getting to that core you.
Mm-hmm. So I know that for the focus of this episode, I thought it'd be so cool to even think about like how entrepreneurs can use microdosing and psychedelics. But first, I'd love to know, like, can you give us a brief overview of who should be considering psychedelics or microdosing? Is this for everybody? Is it only for people who feel maybe like they're struggling with something? Is it for people who want to like tap into a new level? Who would you say should start exploring this topic in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually interviewed a medicine man on Modern Psychedelics who has a really beautiful perspective on this. And that is that these medicines are here for humanity to use and
Wow.
to bring into their lives for whatever reason. But how do you know that it's something that you should be engaging with? Because it's not for everyone. It's
Right.
definitely not for everyone. It's a very specific path that is for some people and it's not for some people. And the answer that he gave us when we asked him that question is that it has to be a heartfelt call. So it has to come not from your ego and not from your mind and not from like that mind curiosity, but from a call in your heart. So it's almost this like deeper sense of being called by it
Mm-hmm.
to go deeper into yourself, because there is also this tendency in the psychedelic community to stamp the psychedelic passport, which I think Tim Ferriss coined. But just to like have the experiences, to have the experiences, and like, I guess it's like the whole psychonaut culture, but just like to try all of them. And, it's a very egoic way to approach this. So, yeah, that's what I would say. You have to like really feel it in your heart. You have to feel the call.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And honestly, I kind of like approaching my entire life that way. It's like sometimes you just have that gut feeling, whether it's with a relationship, with plant medicine, with a job, right? Like if you're getting ready to quit a job, with a friend that maybe you've just been feeling like this isn't working anymore. And I just think if
Yeah.
more of us really tuned into that heart call, or maybe you call it the gut feeling, or maybe you call it your intuition, like if you get quiet enough and you tune in and you really think about something that's on your heart, like you should get an instant kind of like, yes, this is for me, or no, this is not for me. But I think we're so bogged down with like the noise of the world that people actually don't know how to understand if they're feeling the heart call or not. So
Yeah.
that's such an interesting topic. And, I got to listen to that episode because that sounds like exactly how I aspire to make more of my decisions, both as a business owner and just as a human being on this earth.
Yeah, especially when you're considering entering an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
You really don't want to be coming at that from a place of ego.
So true.
Yeah.
So can you tell us, I know microdosing is something that you're passionate about. So can you give us like a little overview of what is microdosing? And I know there are different protocols that you've experimented with as well. So maybe you can also share what a couple of those protocols look like, just to set the stage for what we're talking about when we say microdosing.
Yeah, absolutely. So microdosing is huge right now. It's everywhere. Um, so microdosing really has three main components to it. So it involves taking a subperceptional dose for an extended period of time with intention. So let's break that down. So a subperceptional dose, what does that mean? That means that you're taking an amount about 1/10 to 1/20th of a regular therapeutic active dose. So that can be as small as 0.05 grams to maybe zero point 0.5, but I feel like that's really pushing it. So the subperceptional dose is not really meant to do anything. It's more, you're more going to experience just like, I call it just like everything kind of has like a little bit of a glow
Yeah.
to it,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not like seeing things. You can drive, you can cook, you can work. You can definitely work and get things done. But yeah, it's that subperceptional, very low dosage. And then over an extended period of time. So this just means that you're doing it within a protocol. So at least for a month, up to 6 months, 9 months. I think people have even done it for a year. So there's a level of commitment that goes into it, and you are following a schedule, which I'll talk about. And then with intention. So this isn't something that is taken like a pharmaceutical. This isn't something that you just like pop into your mouth and it's a magic pill. The way that you work with your microdosing protocol seems to have an effect on the outcomes. So, doing it with intention, what are you wanting to achieve? Why are you doing this? What are you wanting to accomplish? How do you want to feel? What do you want? What breakthroughs do you want to have? And also, what other practices can elevate your microdosing experience? So by that I mean maybe you want to incorporate a meditation practice. Maybe you want to start doing breath work. Maybe you want to start journaling your insights and your progress. That's the intention piece. That's really important
Mm.
with psychedelics. Now, if we're talking about a protocol, the most widely used one that I seem to come across is called the Fatimid Protocol. So James Fadiman wrote a book called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide.
Mm.
And he is the one who kind of catapulted microdosing into the public because he was on I think it was a Tim Ferriss podcast
Mm-hmm.
where he talked about microdosing, and of course his audience just went bananas for it, and that was really the catalyst for bringing microdosing to the masses. But in his book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, he dedicated a full chapter to microdosing, and his protocol that he developed is the following: so you take your microdose on day 1, and then on day 2 and day 3 you take a break, so you don't dose. On day 4, you take a dose and you repeat. So you're dosing every 3 days. And the reason for that is on day 1, you're going to really feel the full effects of that subperceptional dose. On day 2, what's interesting is that most people, a lot of people, report that they still feel the afterglow effect of the microdose. So they're still seeing some effects and benefits from it. And then day 3, you're kind of brought back down to baseline. So this protocol is really brilliantly designed because it allows you to
Mm.
compare those 3 states and to compare your microdosing days to your baseline days.
Love it. Can you share like what your first microdosing experience was like and any profound benefits or realizations or outcomes that you noticed at the end of that microdose? Like you were like, I am different in this way, or I achieved this outcome. Like I'm just curious to hear about that first experience and what realizations you had out of it.
Yeah. So the first time that I properly did a microdosing protocol was at the start of the pandemic in March 2020. And we just got news that we were going to be locked up, right? And everyone had a feeling that it was going to be for quite a while. So I was like, you know what? I finally have the time and space to dedicate to this, to do it properly. So, like, I got all my mushrooms, I got all the stuff, I committed to it, and I started the protocol. And the place that I was in at the beginning was I was going through that heartbreak, and I was going to ayahuasca ceremonies quite often, and I was going to therapy quite often. And a lot of progress had been made, a lot of progress. But I started hitting this wall similar to just before I went to ayahuasca. And I wasn't quite sure what it was. And in retrospect, looking back, I think that it was these thought patterns that were just so deeply ingrained within me
Yeah.
were no longer aligning with who I was becoming.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't break through them. And what the microdosing did was it allowed me to really shake things up in my brain and start to create some new neural pathways. And what started happening was, man, this veil of depression that I didn't even know was there lifted.
Wow.
I didn't even know it was there until it was gone. And the moment that I realized it, I was like outside, it was starting to become springtime. I think I had been on the protocol for a month or two. So I was really starting to feel a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Psilocybin containing mushrooms are antidepressants. So I was walking one day and I was like looking at a tree and like a bird flying around the tree. And I was just like so taken by the beauty of it, of this like simple moment. And I was like, wow, it's like I'm seeing something that I've seen before, but I'm for the first time.
Yeah.
And because that veil has been lifted, I'm able to like really see the beauty of and connect with it. So that just opened up this like new way of being, opened up, you know, more productivity. I was working on the podcast at this time and I was able to become so much more in flow and so much more productive and so much more creative and so much more present to what I was creating.
Mm-hmm.
It did wonders for my healing as well because I was just able to like see things again, like going back to that tree. I was just able to
Mm-hmm.
see things differently. And that is so powerful. And, you know, my mood just improved so much. And I
Mm-hmm.
did this protocol for, I think it was like 6 or 9 months. I don't remember, but I was on it for quite a while and I have not been on it. I haven't done like a proper protocol since then, but I'm actually thinking I'm going to start one up again right now.
Yeah. It's cool to hear you talk about, and I've read this countless times too, of how it can rewire your neural pathways. And so I think like a lot of people's hesitation is that, okay, I'll microdose or I'll go to the ayahuasca ceremony, but what happens after? Will I just fall right back into the depressed or anxious or stressed out or, traumatized person that I was? But it sounds like what you're saying is there is that possibility that like it does lift that veil of depression and you could actually stay in a positive headspace even when you stop the microdosing. Is that kind of what your experience has been?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a work in progress. And, you know, life, if I'm learning anything as I'm getting older, it's that life has
Oh
peaks
yeah.
and valleys, right? So, you know, I mentioned that I'm thinking of doing a protocol again right now because I'm in a bit of a valley right now. Like, to be
Yep.
perfectly honest, like, I just did 2 huge trips across the country. We're in the middle of this like never ending pandemic.
Yep.
Like, you know, probably a lot of people are struggling right now. I
100%.
certainly am. Like, you know, I'm feeling a little bit dysfunctional right now. Like, I
Yep.
can't seem to get out of bed. I
Yep.
can't seem to cook myself a nice meal. So that's why I think that it's time for me to start this microdosing protocol again because
Mm-hmm.
I just need that support right now. And that's okay. We all need medicines, we all need
Yes.
support. And
Mm-hmm.
if we know how to use them properly with intention, with care, and use them to create the change that we want to create for ourselves, then
Yeah.
that's so powerful.
Mm-hmm. And you said something earlier that really resonated with me, and that's that it's a tool in like your tool belt or toolkit, right? It's not like any one thing is going to change your life or like solve all the world's problems, but to be able to start coming to a place in your life where you know what needs to be in your tool belt so that when you hit a valley, like you said, life isn't all peaks. That's just the reality of it. As business owners, as human beings, we all hit low points through the week, through the month, through the year, and to have a bunch of tools that you can rely on, one of those maybe being psychedelics or whatever it is, to be able to pull that out in conjunction with your meditation, with your breath work, with your cold plunges, with eating healthy, with moving your body. It's like we're always going to be dancing between which tools do I need right now. And that's why I love this conversation, because it's introducing a new tool to people. Just as I've had breathwork experts on the podcast, I've had, creative writing coaches, and this is equally important, but less talked about, right? So I think it's cool to hear you say, like, it's just one more tool that you can rely on if it works for you, if you like it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's like, I'm at a point right now where we're going into season 2 with Modern Psychedelics, which you know what that's like, Kelsey, being a podcaster. And I really want to do our audience justice. I really want to bring these amazing conversations forward to people. And I'm also working on a coaching practice right now. And that's like that entrepreneurial side of my life. And right now I'm finding that I can't show up fully in the way that I want to. And that's when I look into that tool belt that you were talking about. And it's like, okay, well, what can I do now? What can I do here? How can I elevate myself? Like, I had my month and a half of just like feeling sorry for myself and like being a victim to the situation and like just being couch girl and watching Gilmore Girls, you know?
Yeah.
But I'm at a point now where I'm like, okay, I really want to feel that motivation, that productivity, that flow state, that creative force in me again. And I know that microdosing is something that is going to help me with that, as long as I am doing it with that awareness and that consciousness.
Yeah. And I love what you wrote me. We were chatting before this conversation in emails, and something that really resonated that you said was something along the lines of, understanding that we are infinite potential is powerful knowing for anybody who wants to create something. And I was thinking about how this applies to entrepreneurs. And a lot of the people that I work with inside of the Visionary Method, they have this idea for the business, they join the program, they do the first few things, and then it's like there's this block and they think, I'm not good enough. I'm not, the expert, and I don't deserve to have space in this industry. Who is going to pay attention to what I have to offer? And it's like the opposite. They don't see infinite potential. They actually just see that this isn't going to go anywhere and I should just give up on myself. And it's like a bit of imposter syndrome and a bit of just a mindset block, because if you've never grown a massive business, if you've never built a platform where hundreds of thousands of people want to hear from you, then you may not believe it's possible. But the truth is, we all have a voice for a reason. We all have a unique perspective for a reason. And I'm wondering, do you think that psychedelics can actually unlock that infinite potential and help somebody to like bust through whatever that wall is that actually kills 99% of entrepreneurs in their first couple years?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. For you guys can't see us right now, but I was just, the entire time Kelsey was just talking, I was just like, yes, because those fears that you were describing, Kelsey, are so real. We have imposter syndrome. We don't think we're good enough. Yes, people want to hear from us, but we don't think that they do. These deep fears surface when we're trying to build something that is so meaningful to us. And we're going to be tested along that process of birthing something, of birthing your idea, of birthing your company, your business, your podcast, your product, of bringing something into this world. You're going to be confronted with all of the fears that are getting in the way of that. And I am really working through that right now with Modern Psychedelics. And, to answer your question, do I think that psychedelics can help us bust through them? Absolutely, but it takes work. So the psychedelics, in my experience, they will expand your awareness. It's kind of like they're like a flashlight. and you go into your psyche, and they shine this light into the corners that you maybe haven't explored before, and they show you like, ooh, maybe you should look at that, maybe you should look at that. And the magic of psychedelics is that every experience is completely different and unique, because the medicine will show you exactly what you need to see at that time. So when you apply that to an entrepreneur who's trying to build something and birth something and bring something into this world, and they're being blocked, absolutely, a psychedelic will show you what is blocking you. But that's not enough. The awareness is a big part of the work, and seeing it is a big part of the work. But what do you do after? You have to integrate it. You have to sit with it. You have to confront it. It's not a magic pill. And I think that's the biggest myth around psychedelics, is that you do it and you have the experience and you come home and like it's all good and dandy and fine and you're healed. That was certainly my expectation. It's not like that at all. That couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, it will create more work for you. But the benefit, the light at the end of the tunnel is such a juicy reward of understanding who you are, which is that infinite potential. And the only thing standing in the way of your infinite potential is these false stories and narratives and limiting beliefs that we tell ourselves about not being good enough, which are just not true at all, because we are all infinitely capable creators in this world. And we can do anything that we set our minds to.
So good. I've heard you mention this word of integration, both on your podcast, and I think we were chatting about it. What do you mean by you need to not stop at just doing the psychedelics? You need to integrate. Can you just expand on like what that actually looks like?
Yeah. Integration is the buzzword in the psychedelics community.
Okay.
And it's something that I'm an Aquarius, so I'm like so heady, and I like to like think things through until they're dead. Like I just like really want to like understand things from all angles, and I approach integration in that way, where I'm just really trying to like understand what it really means. And it's not like there's really a book out there on it. It's something that you do, but what I am learning to be my truth and my perspective about what integration is that it actually becomes a lifestyle and a mindset that you start to wear. And integration is not limited to psychedelics. It's just like a very, very key part of psychedelics, but anything that you do needs to be integrated.
Yeah.
Perhaps someone in your audience is listening to something right now and something really stuck with them and it really hit them and it really resonated with them. They got to sit with it and integrate it and process it. And eventually some sort of tangible change will be the result of that integration. So integration, it's the work that we do after, but it's also, like I said, a lifestyle. It's constantly happening. Even when we think we're not integrating, we're integrating, because it's just the process of change, and we're constantly changing and growing and evolving, even when it feels like we're not. So at Modern Psychedelics, our like tagline is the work begins after you come back down to earth, which kind of speaks to this idea of integration. That's really where the work happens. And, it's easy to like be in the middle of a psychedelic experience and like, I don't know, perhaps you're in the cosmos somewhere, tapping into your infinite potential, or, you're in an alternate world, or maybe you're working through a trauma or something. It's easy in that moment to feel that. But when you're not there anymore, how do you bring that into your life? That's what it's all about.
I know some of the benefits of microdosing have been said to be like that flow state where you just feel like things are working. Like you're not distracted by the past. You're not necessarily thinking about the future. You're just like here and now and focusing on the present moment or whatever project is in front of you. And that is something that I've been deeply fascinated about, because I feel like I have a bit of a squirrel brain, like very ADD. And then I see some of my entrepreneurial friends who are very focused, and they seem to fall into a flow state where they just like create an online course or they build something epic. And they're like, I just didn't leave my house for 36 hours. And I'm always like, well, my body just doesn't work that way, it seems. But I'm curious, do you have any kind of like anecdotes, like stories, or just like any information to share on how microdosing could potentially, or does it induce that flow state? Have you experienced that? I'm just curious to hear your perspective.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, isn't it so easy to look at others and be like, how did they just do that?
Do it.
Again, it's the stories that we tell ourselves. I'm
Yes,
sure
it
that many
is.
people look at you and are like, how the heck did Kelsey do that?
I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So the flow state, well, I guess maybe let's talk about the intentions that people would maybe have with microdosing. And one of those might be to really become more productive, to maybe tackle a big project, maybe a new
Yes.
business venture, maybe something that like your energy isn't fully behind yet. And you just need that little bit of a boost
Yeah.
to get your energy there, that fully engaged energy. So, if that's your intention, then I will just preface this by saying research into microdosing is extremely small. There's really not that much out there. Um,
Right.
so a lot of our understanding of how microdosing works is a lot of theories.
Yes.
So I am not a scientist. I can't speak to like what is happening in your brain. I know of a paper, that was published by the Institute, the Beckley Foundation, which is a psychedelic research foundation, and they found that even a very small microdose
Mm-hmm.
seems to produce the BDFN, or activate the BDFN, which is the catalyst for neurogenesis in your mind.
Wow.
So it is creating some sort of um, favorable environment in your brain for just being super sharp and super productive.
Yes.
That's how I'll say it in my non-scientific way.
That's perfect.
But yeah, I've absolutely experienced flow states. So when I was first launching Modern Psychedelics, I was microdosing. I was also working with a life coach at the time.
Hmm.
And the combination of microdosing and having the support of my coach really gave me the confidence and the energy to launch this thing
Cool.
into the world. And I did take a microdose yesterday for the first time in a while, Kelsey. I've just been in this rut.
Yep.
I just like need some support here. Okay.
Yep.
And I actually went to a coffee shop yesterday to get some work done. I don't know if it was like the combination of getting out of the house and the microdose or what, but
Yep.
I got so much done. It was insane.
Yeah.
And you just like, I don't know, I find that I just don't get distracted and I can really just focus. It's like akin to a meditation practice. Like that's
Yep.
the level of mindfulness that I personally experience when I am microdosing. And I
Mm-hmm.
also just want to like differentiate, like we're talking about microdosing and macro dosing. They're
Yeah.
very different. So I just want to put that out there as well,
Absolutely.
just so that the audience
Yeah.
knows.
Are there any negative side effects to microdosing, whether you've experienced them or that you know of that could happen? Or like from everything that I hear, I see it as like just an opportunity, right? I'm wondering, is there a potential a downside to it?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a shadow side to psychedelics for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm so happy that you asked this question because it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I'll speak to my personal experience, like the not so great effects that I've experienced from it. So I got to a point in my microdosing protocol where I knew that it was time to come off because I felt that I was actually starting to bypass some of the difficult emotions that were actually beneath me. So, for example, there's like something in me that is unhealed and that I need to look at. But when I have my microdose, I'm like so in flow and in such a good mood that I'm not looking at it, but it's still there. So it's going to resurface and come out. And I remember there was this point where I just like started crying and I was like, I can't do this anymore because now I actually just need to go dive into that part and look at that.
Yeah.
So again, that's where the awareness comes in. So anyone who is going to do a microdosing protocol, like I said, it is not something that you just pop into your mouth. You got to have a very high level of self-awareness, be really in tune with yourself, really listen to yourself, and really tune into your intuition. And then I know that there are medical experts out there who have spoken to populations that should not microdose or who should at least take extreme caution. So,
Yeah.
that includes people with generalized anxiety. It's interesting because people with generalized anxiety seem to report that it either helps them or it makes things so much worse.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also, it's like still too early to say all of these things. Because there's not enough research, but this is like what I've heard from the experts out there. So people with generalized anxiety, people, this one's a weird one, but people with like red green color blindness, I've heard that they can have like those, like they can see traces in the air when microdosing. And then like people on the autism spectrum seem to need higher doses, and people with like a history of psychosis or mania, I mean, you got to approach psychedelics with extreme caution, if at all,
Yeah.
in those cases. But again, guys, I'm not a medical doctor or a scientist. Please consult with your physician.
Yeah.
How to put
Mandatory
that
disclaimer.
mandatory disclaimer. No one
I
come
love
at
it.
me.
No, and you know what? Like, that's why I love the podcast is that like we can just chat from personal experience. Like, nobody needs to pretend they're the expert, but we can listen to this episode and decide for ourselves whether we want to go learn more, feel empowered enough to try them and use them for whatever intention we may have. So I love that we can just have this kind of more casual conversation about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, totally.
Um, I know on a recent psychedelic experience or microdosing experience, you'll have to clarify, you decided to leave BC and come back to Ontario. And it sounds like you had a bit of a, just like a moment, an epiphany, or whatever you want to call it, a realization. Can you take us to that experience and share why you decided to move back home?
Yeah, so it's a bit of like a spiritual story. Is your audience cool with that?
Mm-hmm.
Can we get into that
Absolutely.
side? Yeah,
They're
okay.
used to that. Sometimes I go on little tangents as well. So,
Okay, great. Yeah, so I moved to BC and I figured that I was going to be living there indefinitely. And I have a tribe that I sit with when I do ayahuasca here in Ontario that is very dear to my heart. And before I left, I had the biggest cry with my shamans, and I was just like having such a hard time comprehending the fact that I wasn't gonna be there with
yeah.
them anymore, because I would go to retreats like quite often, and leaving was really hard. But I got to BC and I was like, hey, I'm gonna start like looking for different groups that I can sit with, and like I started speaking with shamans, and yeah, the energy was just not there.
Yep.
I just, my heart was still back in Ontario with my group there.
Yeah.
And then I would go fly between Ontario and BC. I think I came back 2 or 3 times during those 6 months, to come back for ceremonies here.
Wow.
And the last one was in October. So it was 3 months ago now, maybe 2.5 months ago. And I, previous to that, I had just been going back and forth about like, do I want to stay here? Do I not want to stay here? Things seemed like they were about to start getting worse in the world,
Mm-hmm.
with the pandemic and like travel restrictions and all of this. And I just didn't know if it was a good idea for me to like stay in this province alone without family. And I went to my ceremony and I was thinking about it the whole time. I was like, do I stay?
Yep.
Do I go? Do I stay? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And what I saw was I in ayahuasca ceremonies, you will be gifted with visions
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And what I saw was all the highways in BC like jam packed and like people trying to leave the city but not being able to. And it was like chaos and hectic. And I was just like, okay, this is weird. And I took that as a sign of like, I don't know if I should stay. And then I decided that I would. And then near the end of the ceremony, um, I was speaking with my shaman, and I think she just sensed that like in my heart, I wanted to come home and that like my heart was anchored here.
Yeah.
She was just like, Lana, come back. And typically she would like never tell me what to do with like that. But it was just like she knew that I just needed
Yeah.
someone to be like, you got to do this. So, anyways, now I'm back and I'm so happy. It feels really good. It's really what I learned about that was that if you're going to live far away from your family, you have to have a really, really good reason to do that.
Wow.
It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. And I guess like I just had the sense from being in ceremony that it was like really just time for me to like be as close to my roots as possible
Yeah.
because we actually don't know what's going to happen. We don't. We don't know if things are going to get worse. I
True.
hope that they don't, but
True. Hmm. Such an amazing story, and I'm happy you're back. And I think community is such a important heartbeat in everybody's life. And if you feel like you have a community somewhere that you are not living, it's kind of devastating, right? Like that's a core
yeah.
pillar of who we are, is being rooted in something. And I know for me, like when I moved out of Toronto a year and a half ago, my priority was find community because I will be happy if I have community
Yeah.
here, and that's it. So I can really appreciate your love for the community and why you came back for that.
Yeah. We don't have the mountains here, but we have community. So,
You know what? I fully agree with that. I absolutely do. So now you actually practice, I don't know if you call it practice, but as a psychedelic integration coach. Tell us about that. We want to know everything.
yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this because I am pivoting in my career at the moment. And I guess just some backstory is that I always knew I wanted to go back to school for something. And
Yeah.
for a long time, I thought that was going to be spiritual psychotherapy. I was looking into this program to become a transpersonal psychotherapist. And
Yeah.
I just really wanted to work with clients one on one and be a part of their transformation, a part of their healing,
Yeah.
and just hold space for people. That was like something that I felt very deeply. And the spiritual psychotherapy program didn't seem to work out. Like the program had been canceled when I wanted to apply for it. It just like wasn't working out. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And I discovered coaching.
Yep.
And my friend who hosts the podcast with me went to this school called IPAC, the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. And
Mm-hmm.
she was always talking about it, always talking about it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look into this thing. I looked into it. And as soon as I started reading about it, I was like, okay, no, this is it. This is it. So I finally signed up. It's like, it made me so uncomfortable. I had to really jump off a cliff and financially commit to that because it's an expensive school.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm about like over 2/3 of the way done with that program right now.
Wow.
And I'm going to become a certified professional coach by the end of it. And I'll be accredited by the ICF, which is like the governing body of
Yep.
professional coaches. And yeah, it's just an absolutely incredible program. It's so thorough, and I was really drawn to it because it's really like quantum and based in energy. So
Yeah.
the coaching process that we use is called core energy coaching, and it's basically coaching from within to like bring out the potential in a client. And
Yeah.
the process, it kind of like emotionally connects their inner purpose to their outer goals.
Yep.
So you're really working with core energy, we call it. And what I love about this program is that they teach us the tools and skills that we need to coach anyone through anything. And they always say, like, your niche doesn't really matter. What matters is that you become an expert in the coaching process.
Yes.
So I'm already feeling confident that I can coach anyone through anything.
Yeah.
And of course, the niche that I want to choose is to do psychedelic integration coaching.
Yep.
And what that means is often when people have these very profound experiences with plant medicines and psychedelics and altered states of consciousness, they come back and they're just like a little jarred, a little shaken. Um, you've had to confront yourself. You've probably learned some stuff about yourself. You've probably learned some stuff about the nature of reality.
Yeah.
You've probably learned some stuff about things that are standing in your way. You might be asking yourself who you are. You might be asking yourself what your values are. And you might be asking yourself what all of these new insights mean for who you are and who you want to be and how you want to be in the world.
Yeah.
It's a lot to handle, and support during this process of integration is just fundamental. It's fundamental. So, of course, being so passionate about psychedelics, of course, I want to work with people who have had these experiences just as I have. And
Yep.
as passionate as I am about psychedelics, it's the integration is really where the like juicy work comes in.
Oh my God. I love that so much. And it's so cool that you're able to get certified and to like really understand coaching and then to kind of pair it with something that you've had a personal transformation using, i.e., psychedelics, and helping people to actually come back from the experience and maybe like debrief with you and then put all of those realizations and things that they had come up into action, right? Because that's where you say the real work starts. So it's
It's the dream.
fascinating.
It's the
Yeah.
dream.
Oh my gosh. And I believe that like there are these opportunities for all of us to merge what we have been trained in professionally with what we are passionate about personally. And that's kind of exactly what you're able to do as a psychedelic integration coach. It just shows us that it is possible. And I can see with the rise in conversations happening around psychedelics and just the rise in acceptance that coaching is going to help you accelerate your life in so many ways. Like this is needed. And I don't know if there are a lot of people doing this, but I see a big opportunity for you in this realm.
Yeah, there's definitely a few programs coming out now that are like specifically for psychedelic integration coaching.
Yeah.
But a lot of those programs are for people who are already professional coaches and are already certified.
Right.
And I just feel like because I've gone through such an incredible, like I am obsessed with IPEC, Kelsey. It is the most
Wow.
amazing program. Like I just don't even feel like I need that because I feel like I've been equipped with like all of the tools I could
Yeah.
possibly need to take anyone through really anything.
Unbelievable. Okay, so we're going to start winding this down, but I have a few last questions. I'm just like, should have booked you for 2 hours, apparently. If somebody is looking to get started on psychedelics, trying psychedelics, experimenting, using microdosing to unleash creativity or unlock that flow state, but they have no idea where to begin, where do they look? Who do they call? What is the next best step that you would suggest for somebody who's kind of starting at ground zero here?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, if people in your community are resonating with this podcast, I will personally say to you that I'm so excited for the journey that you're about to begin with learning more about psychedelics and maybe experiencing them. But come listen to the Modern Psychedelics podcast. Of course, we
Yes.
have so many great guests and conversations, and our community is a really nice mix of people who are quite experienced and people who are, just starting out, and then also people who maybe have never had an experience, but they're just looking for the information
They're
and
curious.
they're curious. So yeah, come listen to the podcast. A great place to start is to really like tune into your inner purpose and your inner desire of why you are curious. What do you want to gain? What are you looking for? What are you expecting from this experience? Again, back to that, is it coming from the heart or is it coming from the ego?
Mm-hmm.
Check in with yourself. And then in terms of like actually making it happen for yourself, of course, these things are not legal at the moment, which I find utterly ridiculous that we have made nature illegal. But that's another episode.
Totally.
But you know, and to really make it, it's out there, it's happening. Try to connect with spiritual communities in your city or town, and there's lots of them. And if you can't in your town, then online, and just really connect with people, ask around. You know, there's a couple of really great books that I can recommend if people want to learn more.
Yep.
As well, there's of course Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, and then particularly for ayahuasca, there's one by Rachel Harris called Listening to Ayahuasca, which is absolutely incredible. There's Food of the Gods by Terrence McKenna, who wrote this book all about these different medicines and like the indigenous and anthropological underpinnings of them. And then there's also like the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide. So yeah, there's so much out there and so many resources. Does that help? Do you think that
It
helps people?
absolutely
Yeah.
does. And you're right. I think like at a certain point, like the listener who's curious, they have to kind of find their own next step of what makes sense based on what their experience is, what their baseline of knowledge. But yeah, I will definitely write out all those books in the show notes. And yeah, they can always connect back with you too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and a really good resource like for microdosing specifically where I've taken a lot of my knowledge from is Third Wave. They're like an online education platform.
Mm-hmm.
And they have like so much information on microdosing, so definitely check that out. We're hoping to
Amazing.
have them on the pod
Yeah,
this
I
year.
wanted to kind of wrap up with the podcast. What can we expect? Is it coming back? I know that you had a really epic, like 20 episode or something around there series with really great guests. Like I've tuned into bits and pieces of your episodes, listened to a couple of the solo shows, but now my interest is peaked. I'm like, I'm going to have to start at episode 1 and just go all the way through. What's the future of the podcast looking like? And when can we expect more content?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for season 2, Kelsey. It's going to be epic. So we've started recording right now. We're currently recording. We are really manifesting some big guests for season 2. Like we're going for it. Like no holding back. We're just going for it.
Love it.
I've actually been working on a complete rebrand of the whole brand. It's going to like look completely different. It's going to feel completely different. We have a mission statement. We have a vision statement. We have a manifesto. We have community guidelines now. Like we're going big time. And I'm just so excited for all of it. And, you know, even just the growth that I am personally experiencing from just being a part of a podcast is insane. And you know, the community is growing so much. But yeah, we're just going big time. Like I'll leave it at that. We're gonna have some really big conversations around our whole mission, which is bringing back intuition and heart to the conversation. Because right now, especially in this Western society, we really, really focus on logic and the mind. But when we're talking about something like psychedelics, which is entering altered states of consciousness, which cannot fully be understood or explained by logic, we have to have room for ancient wisdom, you know, like the ancestral lineage, the intuition that is coming through, the messages that are coming through, all of that. So yeah, we're super excited to just like offer a very different perspective to psychedelics in the space. And of course it's called Modern Psychedelics, but the irony is that in order to really integrate these medicines successfully into our modern society, we got to look to the ancient wisdom.
I love that. It's like this beautiful dichotomy almost of the ancient wisdom, the modern, but like you're fusing that together. And I think that's what sets your podcast apart, which is really cool. Wow. Okay. This has been so awesome. You've certainly got my interest piqued. It's something I've been very fascinated with and wanting to learn more about. And so this conversation has been so epic. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your heart and your wisdom and your personal experiences. And I would highly recommend people get in touch with you. Where is the best place for them to say hello or to just connect with you and contact you?
Yeah. So, well, for Modern Psychedelics, we're Modern Psychedelics on Instagram, modernpsychedelics.net online. And then for me personally, if you want to get in touch with me for coaching or if you have any questions, my personal Instagram is Lana Pribic, LANAPRIBIC.
Perfect. I will link it all in the show notes. Lana, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. We hopefully will not wait another 100 episodes to reconnect with you, but wish you all the best on this epic journey that you are on. And thanks again for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me.